Good morning. We are live on Casually Baked, the podcast with Danielle Simone Brand. Danielle, thank you so much for joining me this morning to talk about weed moms.
Thank you so much, Joe. I'm happy to be here.
Yes, man, this is such a good conversation to have. I've got so many mom listeners and, parents in general. And I get emails from dads and fathers and moms and wives. And the messages are very different. The women are like, I really like cannabis. It's helpful for me, but I feel shame around it. I feel closeted. And the emails I get from the men are, can you please help my mom? Can you please help my wife get okay with cannabis as medicine? So, I think it's fascinating the structure of the female mind, whatever flows through our blood and DNA and culture that has created this kind of women have to take care of everything. They have to, burden everything. And then we find something that helps us and we got to be shameful and closeted about it. So I'm not a mom. I can't speak to that, but you can, Danielle. So where does that come from? Tell me your experience.
I think that's a fascinating question. And I was just reading a book, Playing Big. Do you know about that one by Tara Moore? And she lays out some really interesting reasons that I think make a lot of sense. They resonate a lot to me as to why women are so worried about what other people think of us, basically. And it has to do with, history and patriarchy and a long history of women having to be likable, to be, pleasing, to be attractive, to be, just somebody who's easy to get along with in order to survive in this patriarchal world. And things are changing, obviously, but that's been ingrained in our great grandmothers and all the way down to us. And I think that mothers in particular, not just women, but mothers in particular, are generally judged, by society, the harshest when it comes to any perceived moral failings. And for many people, using cannabis is a moral failing, even though, we know that's not true. And, these ideas are changing very, very slowly, but that's why I wrote my book, because I want them to change more quickly. I want women to feel empowered to, use cannabis if it feels good to them, if it enhances their ability to, be present for their families, themselves, their work in the world, without shame.
Yes. Drop the shame torch, ladies.
Yes. We don't need it anymore.
I know. Okay. So today I want us to talk about talking about weed. So, what to share, when to say it, how to handle that negative feedback. And, moms love a good teaching moment. So I feel like we can put together some information here today and package that up with your book, Weed Mom. And, that will be a very powerful tool for moms finding their voice around cannabis. So I think the best place for us to start is with your relationship with cannabis, because it definitely didn't start out all lovey-dovey.
Yeah, that's one way to put it. I do describe myself once in a while on social media as a former low-key hater of cannabis. And I really had an epiphany. So, my brief history is that I grew up in Hawaii, so there's definitely cannabis culture there. I was aware of it, but it just wasn't my thing. I didn't understand it. It wasn't, my go-to. I think I smoked maybe twice in high school with some friends, and I was like, what? I don't know. I didn't even know if I felt high, and then I felt hungry. Of course, that was, shitty ditch weed in the 1990s. And then, just fast forward a bunch of years, I met my husband when I was 23, so really young, and we got married when I was 24. And he was definitely a stoner. He was definitely, in that culture and used cannabis a lot. To the point where I started feeling like, oh, it may be causing some problems for him. And he even noticed that it was causing some problems. He wasn't as motivated at work because he was using it a lot. And he had some, I talk about this in the book, so he's comfortable with me relating this part of the story. But, he was really overusing it, leaning on it for some self-medication without a lot of awareness around what, how to do that in a healthy way. So, again, this was prohibition time. We didn't know anything about THC and CBD ratios. We didn't know anything about terpenes. It was just like, weed or no weed, right? All this nuance we have in the legal marketplace wasn't there. So, so he was overusing it, and I was judgy and, that judgy wife about it for a while. And we've been married for almost 18 years now. So this, it's been a long journey. And we'd reached a point in our marriage where it became a real sticking point. It was something that he would hide from me because of my judginess, and that really drove a wedge between us. And we had some other marital problems that erupted after our kids were just out of the toddler stage, just out of that very intense pregnancy, breastfeeding, baby, toddler stage where I didn't know what up was.
Yes, bless your heart. Yes.
And probably he didn't either. So, so these problems in our marriage came to a head, and he went to rehab for weed, which sounds crazy because, as we know, it's not so much that it's physically addictive. You don't go through withdrawals necessarily. You might have some discomfort if you stop taking THC cold turkey after using it heavily, but it's not the same as, so many other substances that can really, mess with you physically. But, he needed to recalibrate his relationship to it. He needed to learn how to use other tools for self-care, as well as cannabis. And now that he's rethought that whole relationship, gone without it for a while, he's actually able to use it in a much more mindful way. And I find that, wonderful that now we get to share it. So how I got into it after rejecting it and saying, okay, I don't think it should be illegal, but I don't really want it part of my life. We were living in California at the time, and I voted for legal weed in 2016.
Thank you.
Yes. Even though I was like, it's not a huge part of my life, and I wish it weren't, but, nobody should go to jail. Absolutely. I never thought that, that it should be illegal. So fast forward a little bit, I became a freelance writer. And I noticed, this was a time of boom for the cannabis industry, and it still is. But, those early days were very heady. And so many publications popping up, around cannabis, and mainstream publications wanting to cover cannabis. So I found myself landing these assignments without even really caring that much about cannabis yet. But it captured my fascination, the fact that it combines science and wellness and self-care, and you can talk about politics and social justice and business and all these different areas. I was like, hey, this is legit awesome in terms of, intellectual stimulation. And
may I interject? I find that fascinating too, that was in direct opposition to what your personal experience of cannabis had been. So, by you doing this homework and doing the research, you're getting to see all of these other perspectives of this plant, which, is so important. And the fact that that this is happening, that you're getting these assignments. Is your husband in rehab during this time? Or is he back at home now and transitioning into a life without cannabis? Where is all that during this time?
Yeah. So when I started writing about cannabis, he was out of rehab, back home, integrating into, our everyday lives again. It was probably 6 months later, I would say, that, a cannabis assignment popped up for me. And I was like, okay, let's give that a try. And, like I said, it captured my fascination. And so slowly I started writing more about it. Also seeing in San Diego, where we were, the proliferation of new recreational dispensaries and even cannabis billboards on the freeway. And I remember my son, who was probably 6 or 7 at the time, reading a billboard and saying, "What's cannabis, Mama?" And I really didn't know. I didn't know what to tell him, to be honest. Was it something that was addictive and harmful, something that I had kind of thought to be true before for my husband? Or was it this substance that helped people in so many other ways I was learning about, with anxiety and with sleep and with, mood and sex and, these things that adults really need, especially adult women. And in my case, being a mom, those are things that I really, really felt were valuable. So I decided to just give it a try for myself. So I guiltily ordered a vape pen and some cookies from my dispensary, and kind of stuffed it in my drawer and forgot about it for a while. And then Finally, when I was alone one day, I was like, okay, I'm just going to do it. I'm going to see how I feel. So I took one hit. It's so silly, now when I think about like how momentous that felt to me, but I took one puff of this vape pen, got on my yoga mat. I had been a yoga teacher for a long time, and was like, all right, let's explore. So I sat there, I meditated, I felt deeply into my body, and then I just started moving in this organic way. It didn't have to be classic postures or, anything that was goal oriented. It was just an unfolding of sensation, and I loved it. It felt transcendent. And I thought, I've been missing out, and I could incorporate this in my life in a way that supports me. So yeah, that was my journey. And then from there, it was just like a quick roll down the road to being a total cannabis lover.
So I find that interesting too, that your first experience, you were like, I guiltily did this. So as you were starting to experiment with cannabis, what is the dialogue that's happening with you and your husband?
Yeah, so we talked about it a lot. I think that there were, dozens of conversations probably over that period of time when I was developing an interest and writing about it and then actually enjoying it for myself. And in the beginning, I was beginning to partake and enjoy, and he was still abstaining totally. So, there were moments that caused some tension, obviously. Like there were moments that he wanted to partake with me but didn't feel like it was healthy enough for him. There were moments that he felt kind of resentful that I got to experiment and have fun, with something that he used to love and wasn't able to. So it was definitely a lot of conversation, some push-pull, some conflict. But, ultimately we were able to figure out, and like I say about talking to kids about cannabis, it's not one conversation or one and done, here's what we're going to do kind of thing. This, it's an evolving relationship.
Yes, it is practice.
Exactly.
It's absolutely a practice. And the other thing that I find really interesting about your story is as you are cautiously onboarding and you're doing the homework, it's to be a journalist to write about the subject matter. I'm curious if your experience and you going this low and slow route, if that's what opened up the doors for your husband to finally introduce cannabis back into his life in a responsible way.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's that and, the availability of products on the rec market that are just so much more, nuanced and subtle, and we have more information. So he was able to, when he first started, dipping his toe back into cannabis, he started with a super high CBD flower, just a tiny bit of THC, and he really felt benefit from that. He felt the settling of the CBD and that just little bit of euphoria from the THC. And that's really helpful. And to this day, he can't consume super high THC products because it's not really healthy for his brain.
Yeah.
So even though I'm a cannabis advocate, I want to make sure that people understand, look, I get that there are downsides to this. I get that we have to use it mindfully or we could potentially get ourselves into trouble. So, I just wanted to approach this from a very realistic point of view.
Absolutely. And that's no different than any other, say alcohol or, tobacco or anything else. Like if you make these decisions to do that, there is always a level of thought and, conscious action that takes place. It's, I find it ridiculous that, we can advertise alcohol still to this day. And, I know it's because of federal legalization still pending, but cannabis is actually a beneficial medicine and there are no redeeming qualities of alcohol. And now that I'm saying that, I'm brought back to the very beginning of your book when you write your breakup letter to booze.
That's right. Dear alcohol, we're breaking up.
Yes. So many moms that I know would love to trade the glass or the bottle of wine that they drink a night with cannabis, but they feel the shame around it. They don't want to smell like weed. They worry about having the conversation with their kids. So the fact that you have elementary age children. Like what is that like for you in your household? How do you navigate that?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question real quick?
Well, so transitioning from alcohol to cannabis, what has that been like for you?
Okay, so that has been interesting. I should say I was never a big drinker before, but it was definitely alcohol was my go-to for socializing and relaxing on Friday night and Saturday night. Um, and and I started to notice that I don't think my body ever metabolized alcohol that well, but I just sort of accepted it as like, okay, if you want to feel good and relax, in the evening, you're going to feel like crap the next day. I just sort of accepted that. But it became worse and worse and more pronounced for me, even, cutting back a lot on how much I would drink on a Friday night, like having one glass of wine might still give me a hangover, might still give me a migraine. I get hormonal migraines that are really, awful to deal with. And alcohol absolutely, makes them worse. It exacerbates them. So for me, once I discovered cannabis and how enjoyable it is and how much I can get to that place of relaxation and ease and transitioning mind spaces from work to family or, family to sexy later on in the evening once the kids are asleep, that sort of thing. Once I realized that cannabis was so helpful for that and that I could feel good the next day, I could feel completely normal and fine and healthy the next day after partaking, I was like, no brainer, I don't have time for that shit. Like,
Yes,
I want to feel good.
I feel you. I have a glass of wine anymore. I'm 44 now, and I wake up the next morning and I feel like I've drank the whole bottle. I have to go back to the counter and look and like, yeah, no, this is ridiculous. So I have really, really loved the drinkables and creating mocktails with, some sort of THC infused whatnot. Lately, I have a Cannacello that a friend made with lemons from their orchard, and it's been so nice because you can feel like you're having a cocktail. You don't have to go outside for a smoke. Somebody in Texas right now, pool's frozen over. And, there's so many benefits now where you can literally have that same habit. You want to have your afternoon, toddy time or happy hour cocktail, whatever. Now you can have low dose cannabis and have a couple and still get that ease and, that just kind of unwinding feeling without feeling like shit the next day and not having to have that, mommy, you smell like your medicine.
Yes, I know. I love the fact that, in the legal marketplace now, we just have so many options. It's not like, yes, I love flower. Now flower is my, passion and joy, but at the same time, I know that it's not everybody's cup of tea and, you can't always smell like weed. And, there are a lot of limitations and considerations, especially for moms. So yes, products like, drinkables or sublingual strips or sprays or, low dose edibles. I think they're just like the perfect entry point for a lot of women in particular these days.
Yeah. In my head, I'm seeing all the moms in the carpool line, picking up kids and stuff, like hitting their vape pen real quick before the kids get in the car. So
I wouldn't recommend driving, but I'm sure it happens. Yeah, I mean, there are so many, so I have a chapter in the book on ways, moments that it's appropriate to elevate when you're a mom, because, safety is a consideration too, especially if you're new and you don't know how THC affects you. I think that's really important too.
Yeah.
Make sure you don't have big responsibilities. You don't have to drive the kids anywhere, when you're trying something new. But yes, there are so many parenting situations that cannabis enhances. And I can't stress that enough. It helps moms be more patient, more present, more willing to get down on the floor and play, more willing to do art and make things messy, get into the kitchen and make a mess. Like I've done all this stuff with my kids while, microdosed or moderate dosed, where I'm totally functional, totally with it. And yet I'm just a more chill version of me. And we have a lot more fun.
yes, way more playful, creative version of yourself.
Yes. Yes. And
I just have littles. I have 7 or 9 technically, nieces and nephews.
Mhm.
And I love being Aunt JoJo and, you know, and playing and having these conversations. It's fun to dialogue with children and old people when you're high. I love talking to little kids and really old folks.
Totally, because, we all those, adulty to-dos can just be set aside for a little while. And, again, it depends on the strain and the dose and all these things. It's a lot of, a lot of things to calibrate, but yeah, it's a win-win. So, in chapter 6,
Oh, wait, you froze. You froze. Will you repeat what you just said? You had just said chapter 6 and I lost you.
Oh, okay. Yes. So we lost each other. So in chapter 6, I talk about a bunch of ways, a bunch of moments and ways that are, win-win for parenting and cannabis. And then some situations where, it's best to refrain. So, to be a responsible user, you have to know right time, right place, right, mood, that stuff.
Yeah, you cut out again a little bit, but yes, set and setting is important in everything we do in life, from our plant medicine, daily rituals to ceremony to just having your yoga and meditation practice. So set and setting, always important. Danielle, you are still frozen on my end. Oh no.
Hi, we're back. Oh no.
That's okay.
Okay.
I went through that. We're good. Let's talk about how these parents, these moms that are like, okay, I hear you, Danielle. Like, I get it. It's good for me. I'm a better mom. How are you having that conversation first with your kids? Because the household dialogue is way more important than any of the dialogue that's happening outside of your own home. So first of all, how are you having that responsible dialogue with your kids? That way you don't feel that shame, about choosing this medicine.
Yeah. So I think it varies a lot based on, the ages of your kids and where you live and your job and your co-parenting situation and that kind of stuff. For me personally, I started talking to them when they were about 4 and 7, and we lived in San Diego at the time. So, legal weed was obvious around us, at least in terms of billboards. And, their dad had been to rehab for it, and I was starting to write about it and get interested in it. So it was a part of our lives, and I knew that I needed to address it. So, the way I talked about it is, it's a plant, first of all. It grows in the ground, just like these other, plants that we enjoy and grow for ourselves. I probably showed them some pictures. I might have even showed them some actual flower or bud and said, like, this is what it looks like. You might see it, in this form, like the pot leaf symbol, or you might, one day see actual flower. I do keep my stash locked, though, at home, just, to be safe. It's a good idea.
Absolutely.
And especially when I have edibles, that's super important. My kids are now 8 and 11, and I'm not at all worried that they're interested in smoking weed. But, if they were to stumble upon an edible and they didn't know what it was, they would eat that. So, or, they might. So, that's why I keep stuff locked. But I tell them it's a plant. Some adults use it for medicine. And some adults use it for, relaxing and feeling good, or for going to sleep, or for just, helping out and getting into a better mood. I also, was clear to say it's not safe for developing brains. It's not safe for kids, unless you're medicating under a doctor's care. There are some uses, obviously, for cannabis for kids, but it's, it's really only medical use that's safe, under the care of someone who knows what they're doing. Although we do use CBD, we use topicals for the kids when they've got aches and pains, when they've, sometimes when they've got abrasions, that sort of thing. So they understand, like, this is a plant that helps and heals. And I even talked about the difference between CBD and THC, and the fact that, CBD is something that, will not make anyone high, but can actually just relax you a little bit. And I've actually even given my daughter some CBD here and there, internally.
And I've had listeners that reached out to me and people that I've had cannabis lifestyle sessions with who really are concerned about, kids having growing pains and not being able to sleep at night, or, one, it was the bedwetting thing and being really aggressive with their siblings. And I feel very good recommending someone to, give CBD to their child. And, an 18-to-1 ratio CBD to THC, I think, is phenomenal for those aches and pains. And the people that have shared that with their children after doing the homework and talking with me, one of the parents, the bedwetting stopped immediately, which I thought was fascinating. And then the other, the growing pains, the sleeping through the night, changed for them. So, everything obviously should be studied and researched, but being able to confidently experiment as a mom is so important. So when you understand the basics of THC and CBD, and you know what to look for at the dispensary, and you understand how to read a certificate of analysis, and to get your hemp products that were, made on a farm in the United States and not somewhere in China. Like, when you know all of those things, you have filled your resource bucket up to make really solid choices and decisions for yourself and your family. And there's nothing you should feel ashamed about around that.
I agree. I agree. And it is sticky, though, when it comes to people living in, non-legal states and prohibition states. And I have to say, so since getting on my cannabis journey in California, we moved to a prohibition state. I live in Idaho now. And I don't say that all the time, but but stuff isn't going to change unless we talk and and normalize responsible use. That's what I'm all about. And I know that there is some risk in that for me, but I also want to totally recognize the privilege of being white and being able to be a canna mom who's out, at least on the internet. In my neighborhood, I'm less out, I'll be honest. I have to get to know people before I can trust whether it's safe, because, I never want to put my custody of my children in jeopardy. I never want to put, my freedom in jeopardy, obviously, but I also want to help push the envelope, because we have to take some risks in order to, to change the conversation.
And I'm really glad that you just brought that up, because that really is one of the sticking points with so many women. Excuse me, when they're trying to develop relationships with other canna moms. How do you go about finding out, who's cool in your hood?
So the funny thing for me is that we've lived in a prohibition state longer during the pandemic than we did before the pandemic. And so my social interactions, are basically none in person right now. So it hasn't been a huge issue. But before the pandemic, I would say that folks that I knew who had come to our state from California, Oregon, and Washington, I would know at least they're used to it. Even if they don't love it, they're not going to be freaked out. So I would be more open with them. Folks who are, more long-term Idahoans, I'm definitely cautious. I'm absolutely, it's something that I feel out for a while first.
Yeah, I had made a joke once that Idaho would be the last state to legalize.
So right now, it's super interesting. This is a little bit of a tangent, but there are simultaneous bills being considered in the Idaho State Legislature that would legalize medical use for very narrow, specific, like terminal cancer and AIDS, really, really like restrictive medical use. And that was introduced by a former sergeant in the Army, I think, who has terminal cancer and, wants to bring medical use, compassionate medical use to people. There's also another bill that passed the Idaho House and Senate and is probably going to be put to voters in 2022 that would ban any future possibility of legal cannabis.
Oh,
yeah. And I don't think the voters would approve that, but the Idaho Senate and the Idaho, Senate did. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Boo.
I know.
Gosh. Okay, so let's talk then. Obviously, there's plenty of people that still aren't into it based on what you just said. So, how do we handle that negative feedback? When you do reach out to someone and say, "Hey, I'm a medical cannabis user. I use cannabis for wellness. Like it makes me a better parent," and somebody tries to shame you or cancel you. Have you had any of those interactions, or do you have any advice on dialoguing that?
Well, I think it depends on, where that person is coming from. If they're coming, if you feel like you may be able to get through to them because of your personal relationship and, offering some facts to, counteract their misinformation or their stigmas, then I think that can be helpful. Offering simple facts like, uh, cannabis is legal for medical use in I think it's 36 states now. It keeps changing and going up. Cannabis is legal for recreational use in 15 states. Not every one of those has had their stores open yet, but as of November, that's legal. So things like that, talking about the different experiences you can have from cannabis, the subtlety of, people who don't know anything about cannabis think like you smoke weed and you get high and that's it, right? They don't understand the whole spectrum of experience that you can have, including, CBD that's that's not psychotropic. It's psychoactive in a certain way, but it's not psychotropic, or low doses of THC that really don't impede, your functioning or really change your perception of reality. They just, relax you a little bit. So things like that. I think talking about the subtle experiences that you can have with cannabis is helpful. And also making it personal, saying, hey, I use it for migraines. It helps me, as opposed to Advil or, prescription medications that mess up my stomach and my digestive system. This is something that I can use to, to feel better when I'm in pain and doesn't cause side effects. Like who wouldn't like that? Who wouldn't
Right.
respond to that? So,
I think that anecdotal evidence, those personal stories are huge. And what you said in the very beginning about, everybody's coming from somewhere different. So instead of that immediate being on the defensive and trying to defend yourself, your lifestyle, cannabis, to me, it's getting way more curious about, well, what was your experience? What happened? Maybe they had a husband that went to rehab for cannabis, like we don't know. And so getting more curious, asking more questions, having them do more talking, I think helps us come up with a better angle, so to speak, on exactly how to talk about the plant. Because, for me as a cannabis lifestyle guide, sometimes I'm talking to a 70-year-old woman, and that conversation is going to be very different than a 35-year-old male. And
yes.
so, knowing your audience, listening to them, being a good listener is huge, staying educated. And anyway, so I appreciate that you're dialoguing this with me, because what seems to me like, a no-brainer, no shit, stand up for yourself. It's your life. Who gives a shit what anybody else thinks? I'm also not a mom and I'm not married. So I know that it feels very different standing in your shoes.
Yeah. Thanks for saying that. And I love what you just said about asking questions, right? Getting curious, because usually people who have really negative views about cannabis don't really understand it. I mean, quite obviously, I haven't met anyone who who really truly understands cannabis and has taken the time to get to know it and to, calibrate their own personal sweet spot with it and then still dislikes it. They might say it's not for me, but there's very little to hate once you understand it.
Yes. And if you have if it's another mom that has, a bunch of screaming kids and they seem sexually frustrated, telling them the benefits of cannabis in the bedroom might help you change their minds.
Yeah, I mean, sex is a whole chapter in the book because it's huge. And, for a lot of moms, sex becomes really difficult after kids. Like there's so many reasons, there are hormonal reasons and just physiological reasons of being like sick and tired of being touched all day, by your kids and not wanting to be touched by somebody else later, and, to just sort of the endless to-do list and the mental load that moms take on. All those things I think contribute. So yes, sex is it's a great way in, because actually, women like to talk about sex. Moms like to talk about sex. If we feel safe.
Yes, I think women like to talk about sex way more than men like to talk about sex.
Yeah.
Women will tell you the nitty gritty of their stories. Men will be like, yeah, we banged. It was great.
That's fine.
So tell me, is there anything that we haven't covered in this dialogue of, helping women drop the shame torch? Is there an angle that we haven't covered that you think is important to focus on?
That's a great question. I mean, I really think, it's about education. It's about dialogue. It's about exposure to, the array of possibilities that the legal marketplace offers. I think that's a big part of it. And that's why I wrote the book, basically, to reduce shame and stigma and misinformation, and to let women know that there's a whole range of experiences you can have. It's not about just, because as I do know a lot of women who said, well, I tried cannabis in college, or, I've tried it once or twice, and, I didn't like it. I didn't have a good experience. And there's a woman who lives in Canada who goes by the Weed Mama, and she's got some great canna education out there. And I quote her in the book as saying something like, if your first experience drinking was doing a line of shots, you wouldn't like the way it made you feel either. You're just not doing it right if you don't like how cannabis makes you feel. And I mean, that's a bit of an overgeneralization, but I do think it's true that, a lot of women I've talked to said, oh, I took an edible with my, boyfriend who was a stoner. He said it was a low dose, and I was like completely high out of my mind, and I hated it. And I'm like, yeah, that's not a good first experience.
Yeah.
Let me guide you to a good first experience, because, I give dosing guidelines that are really low and slow, like 1 hit, 1 puff, or 1 to 2.5 milligrams if it's edible. Really low and slow means you can calibrate your sweet spot. So I just think that if more women knew that, they would feel less afraid, and, hopefully less shame too, because, a lot of people think that they can't function well if they're using cannabis, and that is simply not true. Like, you can function even better.
Yes, and you actually bring me to a thought that, the other fear that women have a lot as parents and consuming is, what if their kids got it? And, there's the fear of developing, mental illness and things like that. And, one of the things that I always suggest to parents that vibrate in that high fear space around cannabis is to have an epigenetic panel done. Like, find out how cannabis and your endocannabinoid system work together. And, I learned so much about how my body interacts with cannabis so that I could really hone in how I use it for myself. But you also can find out whether or not you have that gene that makes you 8x more likely to develop, schizophrenia if consuming a bunch of cannabis. And you could have that peace of mind of knowing what your roadmap is and what your children's roadmap is. And, that is a very empowering tool to hand over to a teenager. Like, this is your life. It's your roadmap. You're in charge, but empowering information.
That is fascinating. Actually, I hadn't heard of genetic tests that can decode some of your epigenetics around your endocannabinoid system. Wow, that would be so interesting.
I know that I metabolize THC faster than the average bear, and I have fewer CB1 receptors. So those two things combined mean that I end up having a higher tolerance, and that, my high falls off faster than most people. Some people metabolize it so slow they can have that edible and still feel it 2.5 days later. Or before, I'm like, whatever, like, this is insane. But now I'm like, oh, that's a thing. So, understanding your own genetics can help you really hone in a better relationship with cannabis for your whole family.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I was going to ask if you had done a show on that.
I did. I've done a couple of shows with my epigenetic coach, and it's really fascinating stuff, and they just keep dialing it in further and further and learning more things. So I'll include a link where people can check that stuff out. But again, great peace of mind if you're a parent who's freaked out about having teenagers that are experimenting with cannabis.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do talk about teens as well, even though my kids are just, preteen. My oldest is 11. We're right around the corner from that. And I really wanted to cover, what its best practices for talking to kids of different ages. And so I studied the Drug Policy Alliance's curriculum called Safety First. That's really solid, really progressive drug education for teens. And, the principles they talk about are like, to educate well around the risks, to educate well around, proper doses if teens do, choose to partake at some point. Because, let's be realistic. Like, did you do everything that you were told to do as a teen? Did you refrain from everything you were told to refrain from? I did not.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. The Students for Sensible Drug Policy, they have a wealth of content on their website that talks about everything from, beer to wine to liquor to cigarettes, cannabis, and it teaches the kids all of it, the good, the bad, the ugly, like they even have, there was one video where it's got a solo cup, and it's like, this amount would be a serving of liquor. This would be a serving of wine. This would be a serving of beer. Like, if you're going to do this stuff, at least make sure you're not going to give yourself alcohol poisoning. So, they have created really good content that kids can share with their parents now, educating their parents about cannabis. And so, yeah, there's a lot of really great resources out there. And, your book, Weed Mom, is one of them. So how can people get a copy of Weed Mom?
They can find Weed Mom on most online booksellers. So Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Powell's. If you want to support your local bookshop, bookshop.org is a great one. You can order it from your local bookstore. You might have to special order it, but they will get it for you. So all those places.
Right on. And if people want to find you and connect with you socially, Danielle, where would they do that?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram at Danielle Simone Brand. So just my full name, my author name. And I have a website as well, daniellesimonebrand.com. Those are the best places to connect with me.
All right. Outstanding. Well, I appreciate your time today. I think it's important to, give moms the little back rub. You can do it. Like, this is okay. Shake it off. Get loose with it. Cannabis is your friend and nothing to be ashamed of. So I appreciate what you're putting out into the world. And, God bless you for living in Idaho.
Thanks so much, Joe.
Well, we are going to end this live stream. Let me check the comments. Coach Johnson says, got to teach them how to have a smoker's kit. Perfume, lotion, hand sanitizer, clear eyes. So yes, have your cannabis locked up, but then I have that too. My little survival kit. Everything I need is in my stash bag. So, if you're still in the closet with the kiddos, having a smoker's kit's probably a good idea.
Yeah. And even just to, be respectful of your family. Like, yes, I will, if I go to the garage to smoke, which I do quite often, I will, rinse out my mouth and, just get a little fresher because, I don't love it when people who necessarily just smoked come and sit next to me if I haven't. So, just basic considerations, things like that. And also, I want to emphasize that, there are other ways to use flower too that, a lot of women don't know about, or a lot of moms who are Canna-Curious folks don't know about. Like, vaporizing flower is much less, as it doesn't involve combustion. It's not nearly as aromatic, but you can still get the benefit of that, pure plant medicine, which is something that I really value.
Absolutely. And I think another go-to for moms are the little tin of mints or, chocolate covered blueberries or whatever, but having just a low dose, pop in your mouth and go, then, there is no ceremony. There is no, smell to cover or anything. It's just easy. It can
That's right.
be.
It can be. It can be. And speaking of ceremony, just to add on to that really quickly, if you do have time, though, it's a wonderful thing to take a little time to yourself. Moms need time to themselves, and it's so hard to get. I mean, especially during the pandemic. But really, if you have little kids, it's hard generally. So making it a ritual, however you consume, whether it's whether it's an edible or a strip or a spray or a sublingual or you're smoking flower or vaping or whatever, but just to take a moment and say, this is the reason I'm choosing to partake at this moment. This is the mood shift that I'm seeking. Like to just set aside that little bit of intention, I think is really helpful. I mean, yes, absolutely. We can pop it on the go when we need to, and that's really convenient and wonderful. But I love the idea of, again, it just feeds this whole mindful use.
Yes, and I do that for myself. You tell people all the time, my cannabis infused meditation is my most important meeting of the day. And it's the very first one I have every single day. And I typically get an eye roll from moms saying like, oh, good for you that you can meditate in the morning. So, it is making that time, whether or not it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whether or not you have to hide in the closet literally for 10 minutes to just be quiet. And that kind of stuff is so important for our sanity.
It really is now more than ever. And I mean, but I remember what it was like, with babies and toddlers. It does not feel like you can get that time away. I get it. And yet I wish, like looking back on my younger, mom self, I wish I had done it. I wish I had known that it was okay for me to take a little time to myself, a little time away from my family, to just get happier, get right in my head so that I could be there, better for them. And, I was a very attentive mom, very, attached mom, and when my kids were very, very little, but I didn't really take care of myself very well. And that led to some problems in my life, in my marriage. And, so as a mom of very slightly older kids now, I want to be a little bit of a mentor or coach to younger moms to say, hey, taking care of you is vital. It's not just like, the thing you do at the very end of your day, possibly before you fall asleep exhausted, but like if you give back to yourself a little bit, you will have more.
Absolutely. Man, I just think so much of moms just, flying off the handle on something and then feeling bad. I mean, I've gotten phone calls from my friends before being like, I'm such a terrible mother. I just yelled at my daughter and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, if you would take that time for yourself, if you would put on your oxygen mask before you put on their oxygen mask, you wouldn't have as many of those moments. They become fewer and further between. And I just think continuously pounding that message home to parents, take care of yourself first. You have to take care of yourself first.
Yes. Amen.
All right. Well, thank you so much for hanging out, and we'll have to do this again soon. Moms need this repetition of messaging, I think.
Thanks so much, Joe. I really had fun.